Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the talk today. This is Artist Talk number 6 that we have going on, and it will be with Delia McCrae talking about what makes a great photograph. My name is Terry Moore, and I am the Executive Director for the Sooke Fine Arts. As we begin, I would like to respectfully acknowledge that the Sooke First Nation, on whose land we gather in celebration of the arts and for which we're grateful to be here. Just a few housekeeping notes as we start out. As I mentioned, we have muted everybody. We will be having opportunity for questions throughout the presentation. And we will be, if there's time at the end, if we have more questions, we'll be answering them then as well. I have the chat window open, so if you do have questions, please feel free to type them in there and I'll make sure that Delia hears them and is able to answer. Let me see. Oh, that's right. Today is typically, here comes one more person in. Typically, we have a seniors tea day at the show. And during the seniors tea, we welcome seniors in. They get a special price, which includes tea and a scone and some raspberry or strawberry jam. And they get to sit and listen to the presentations and listen to the music that's going on and enjoy the art show. So while we're not able to have that happen in person this year, this is at least one way we can gather people together. So we hope that you have your cup of tea ready, and if not a scone, at least a biscuit or two beside you to sit back and enjoy the presentation. Well, of course, it's not only restricted to seniors; anybody can come in. So with that, I'll get started. I'd like to introduce today's artist. As I mentioned, this is our 6th talk, and the artist today is Delia McCrae, who is with us. Delia began taking pictures, like many of us did, with a family brownie camera, and graduated to Polaroids, the latest technology in the 60s. Then her parents gave her an Instamatic camera when she traveled from small Alberta town to the Northwest Territories when she was a teenager. Later, at Carleton University, she learned darkroom skills, and as editor of a small town newspaper in northwestern Ontario, she took and developed photographs for the paper there. And then following a satisfying career teaching languages in Alberta high schools, she engaged in academic pursuits, became a PhD candidate at the University of Victoria, and sought to further develop her artistic interests, which are music, writing, and photography. Delia has participated in local art shows and still enjoys the challenge and the thrill of capturing small snippets of life in beautiful photographs. So today's presentation, what makes a great photograph, you're going to see some of Delia's work, nature, landscapes, the fascinating creatures that inhabit our planet that are a primary source for Delia's photography. So in this artistic talk, please join her as she takes you on a journey to discover what makes a photograph appealing and, above all, memorable and meaningful for the viewer. Delia will discuss why she's drawn to some subject matters and how she approaches the subject to get the best picture possible. In addition, the important steps along the way from the moment in time when the photograph was first recorded on the camera to when it becomes a beautiful print hanging on the wall, that will be discussed as well. So you're going to see photos that include images from around Vancouver Island and photos from Delia's travels in other parts of Canada and throughout the world. So I would like to now turn it over to Delia, and feel free to jump in and start things, Delia.
Well, first of all, I'd like to say thank you very much, Terry, for the lovely introduction and for asking me to do the talk. I appreciate you asking me and respecting my expertise and all the experience I have. And I hope that I can shed some light on photography and what makes a good photograph or great photograph for those who are interested as both photographers and viewers and appreciators of photography as an art. I'd like to start first by saying that Ansel Adams, a really well-known American photographer who was really a pioneer in photography, and his photographing of the Western US, said that there are no rules for good photographs, just good photographs. And the only thing that matters is really where you stand. Well, there are many aspects to photography, but one of them is that it is an art form, and that, as in all art, it has an element of subjectivity. So it's really, as they say, beauty is in the eye of the beholder. First, you as the photographer are the beholder, and you hope that you can transmit that beauty and some emotional impact to your viewer when they see that photograph. Because people that see photographs, that look at your photographs or other people's photographs, need to have something that draws them to that image that you've made. Just like you had to have some reason to take that picture, you had to have something that drew you to that particular subject matter. So in that sense, you're looking for something that's different, interesting, inspiring, that is impactful. And then you have to look at how you're going to approach that. It's sort of, I would like to say, a bit like having a car, a vehicle. You have to learn how to drive it and how to use the different aspects of it, how to make the windows go up and down and how to turn the heat on and off and that type of thing, and then be a good driver. If you have a camera, you need to learn quite a bit about it so that you can then take a good photograph. Fortunately, in this day and age, we have automatic on a lot of settings, so we can always try that, but you really get great photographs if you learn how to manipulate those settings a little bit. And then, of course, we have post-production. Someone said somewhere along the line that I read that if photography just means drawing with light. So light really is where photography begins, because without light, there is no photograph, unless you can manage to photograph in the dark, which some people will with strobe lights. But really, it means light is what's going to make the difference in your photograph, how your subject reflects in the photograph itself. Without light, you don't have much to work with. The photography I'm going to talk about today is basically outdoor photography. I don't generally do studio photography, but there are many art photographers that do a lot of studio photography. So we'll not touch on that subject today, but we're going to be looking at how you can move around your environment in order to get a great photograph. Because when we go outdoors, we always see nice things, right? But we can't always just capture what we see on that film. But if you put some thought into it, plan a little bit ahead, think about what kind of shots you might like to have, then you can do some really great photography. You have to just start looking at things just a little bit differently. Part of that is also developing an artistic eye and training yourself to see things just a little differently. How would that look like? What would that look like framed as a photograph? So framing is another very important aspect of photography. How do you frame the image that you see? Your eye sees everything when you go out, but you need to see a very small portion of that, unless you're working with a very wide angle lens that will capture the entire landscape in front of you. There are lots of other aspects to good photography, and those basically are the compositional aspects of art that we learn about or that you might be aware of. And those are things like harmony, balance, color, line, shape, texture. You want to take all those things into consideration when making a photograph. And if you're looking at a photograph, there may be aspects that appeal to you. Maybe it's the texture, maybe it's the detail that photographer has got very, very close and you love that pattern. So we're going to look at some things like that today. Take a look at the peacock, for example. That's a miracle of nature to have all of those feathers in such beautiful colors. And that's the kind of thing you might like to look for, the detail and the things that you can highlight rather than get just as a small remote subject in the background. So it's a lot about distance from your subject as well. A good photograph. Is the photographer up close? Do you have to move? Do you have to change the angle? How did they photograph that particular subject? So I'm going to talk about nature, things that I see that I like, that are beautiful. We're going to start with one picture that I think Terry's got that she can put up on the screen, and it's called Boathouse Blues, and that was in the Sooke Art Show this year. And for me, this image has such beautiful shades and hues that I just love the bluiness of it. It has the sky, the water, those great doors on the boathouses, and it has wonderful lines that are symmetrically reflected in the water. Reflections are and symmetry like that is something magical about that, and you don't get that without a reflection as a rule. There's also a little leading line there, that a little pathway out. So if you're a boat and a passenger, or you're driving your boat or taking your sailboat out, you go between those boathouses, and leading lines is another aspect of photography that helps the viewer to appreciate a photograph. It takes them somewhere, and that somewhere is another aspect that we'll look at in terms of the storytelling nature of photography. So we have the sky there, different shades of blue, a lot of blue in this photograph, and a lot of detail in the boathouses, really sharp. Another aspect of photography that is super, super important is how well you focus your camera, and what do you focus on. There's such a thing as the depth of field. Do you want everything from right where you're standing, where the photograph starts, to the back of the photograph in focus? Or do you want just one plane, just your subject in focus? So your depth of field is something that you need to look at and be aware of. In this, there's a lot of depth of field there, because there's really a sharp focus from start to finish. We can go to the next one, please, Terry. Okay, so we have a grizzly family feast here, some grizzly bears on the night inlet, and they are grazing around for mussels and kelp and whatever else they can find there. It's August last year, time of year, and again, we have quite a sharp image, a very sharp image of this bear and two other bears, presumably her cubs, who are with her, and some lovely colors of brown, shades of brown, and sharpness in the foreground there, with the branches of these trees and the rocks that are covered with barnacles and mussels. And obviously she's looking at something. I think it's great if you can have a little eye contact. I was quite far away in a boat with a wildlife lens when I took this picture, pardon me. So I didn't have eye contact with her, but it's surprising when you have a lens like that, what kind of contact you might have had that you weren't even really aware of. So I really like this photo. I think it's an excellent representation of the grizzlies up in the Great Bear Rainforest, which we have at our doorstep. Wonderful, wonderful resource for nature lovers and photographers. And we'll go on to the next. And this is Mount Doug, the forest at Mount Doug. Trees are always an amazing subject for photography. And they have terrific lines, all parallel lines going up, and different shapes, forms. Some are in the foreground, some are in the background, different greens there, and a really nice foreground there with not much happening, not too many distractions, in other words, because photography in general is a question of what you don't photograph as much as what you do photograph. There's no blank canvas in photography like there is in art. You don't start with blank canvas and a vision. you have already nature, in this case, out there. You have a vision of what kind of photograph you'd like to create, but you have to decide how to frame that and what you're going to cut out, what you're going to include. Generally speaking, it's, unless you're doing wide angle landscape, it's always good to move in closer to your subject, because people do like to see detail, and you can get some pretty great detail, because if a picture is enlarged and put on a wall, it can really be something that is memorable and really inspiring for the viewer. We can move on now. Now this one is a wilderness retreat. It has some really great colors in it. It has a foreground, really mixed natural vegetation growing, but it has some red soil there, which is coppery and just a lovely color contrast, and an old building in the background, rundown little cabin, a shed. And then that wonderful row of trees all around the back that is kind of the backdrop in the blue sky with a kind of a puff of clouds up there. A lot of great color contrast, really strong colors. That's something I really love. And that's part of the post-processing as well. If you learn to manipulate a little bit, you can enhance your colors slightly so that they're just a little more intense than maybe your camera reflected. And I think that's part of the beauty today, when we have that little bit of extra. And there was a day when that wasn't really acceptable, that it had to be pure, just as seen or as taken. But I think these days it's quite acceptable to be a little more of an artist with your photograph and to enhance aspects of it that you want to bring out. So we can go on to the next. And then there's another aspect of photography, the light and the dark. And so we have positive and negative space. We have the positive space is your subject, and the negative space is, in this case, the dark, can be a light or white background. What the dark does in this case is it hides any distraction. So you really only see that water lily, which I think is a wonderful, beautiful water lily, the way that the light is falling on it. And there is a tremendous amount of detail there. There's nothing quite as beautiful as a water lily, really. And not the easiest things to photograph, but if you get in a canoe or a boat, you can get a great picture of a water lily. So we can move on. And this is in Beacon Hill Park. Some of you might recognize it. So what's good or great about this photograph is, first of all, it's autumn. That tree has got a lot of changing colors in it. It has a beautiful stone bridge. And I think that person there enhances the photograph a lot. It's kind of something people like to relate to, is seeing people or animals in a photograph rather than just natural surroundings, or in this case, maybe just the stone bridge. Those who like architecture might just appreciate the buildings more, but a lot of people like to see some sort of human sort of context there. Somebody walking through the park, they can imagine themselves also being in that position to be walking through that park. And it sparks some sort of good feelings for them to be enjoying that walk through the park. And we can move on from there to Island View Beach. And this is a beach scene just right beside the water. It's a very rugged beach there, and there are a lot of weeds and local flora that grow right next to the water. They're not the most beautiful flowers in the world, but they really are gorgeous in this setting. And it's nice to know that there's water there. So by having a little bit of water back behind, and that's a little bit out of focus, you're not really thinking about the water so much. You have the image of the flowers and the vegetation there in front of you. And there's a log in front that has some detail and gives a lot of texture. So I find those colors at this time of year when the plants are nearly dead quite beautiful, and the texture is really quite, you can almost feel it with your fingers when you look at it. So we can move on to the next. And this is soft glow of evening. So again, that takes us to the light, and the best time of days generally for photographers are early morning or evening. This is the soft glow of the golden hour in the evening. And you see the beautiful hues that are created behind the mountains there. That's the Olympics. And going from pink to gold, and then the golden light that rests there on the rocks in the foreground. And the couple that's sitting there, you can see them. It's not just a silhouette, so night has not yet fallen, but they're obviously watching the setting sun. It's maybe just a really tranquil, pleasant moment for them. And I always like to see the birds in the pictures too. And even though some might consider it a little bit of a distraction, that gull is sitting up on the rock also enjoying the sunset. So I think that's quite a lovely setting there. And you have a lot of focus, a lot of depth of field there. So what you need to do is, in photography technically, is to learn about the ISOs. And when there's less light, you have to use a higher ISO, so your film speed is faster, and you can get as good a picture as you might in the daytime, because our cameras will now do that. In fact, they have automatic ISO settings on them now for marginal light conditions, and they go up very high, much higher than they used to. So there's just a lot of flexibility there for doing photography with the newer cameras. So we can move on to the next, which is a kind of a very colorful one. And these are the peacocks in the park. And how close do you want to get to that fellow? Have you got a zoom lens? Have you got something that will magnify? They're just quite magnificent. You know, when they stretch out those wings, or pardon me, those feathers of theirs, and they fly up to the trees sometimes too. But in this case, it's the colors of his feathers that I find the most interesting. And just, there are many ways to photograph birds, but I love the colors in this one and the detail that I can achieve by using a good lens. And they don't mind standing there for you sometimes if you want to go and take their picture. And we can go on to the next. And these ones, I call that Peacock Party. Just a little more natural setting, sitting around by a fern at the end of the season, it seems, and a little bit of a rough background there on the upper right. I don't think there's anything there that's too distracting, but it's definite that you can really appreciate the birds in it. And I do love the beauty of the colors of the birds in particular. So I kind of like that photograph. So we can move to the next one. And this is another bird in Beacon Hill Park in Victoria, British Columbia, and the heron's nest there in spring. So they spend a lot of time carrying twigs and whatnot, and sometimes they're just tired and sit in the trees, actually. And this is a picture of a heron just sitting in a tree, and such delicate feathers and such beautiful creatures they are, and a lot of detail in that. Again, the sharp focus is very important. And that's a very good example of positive and negative space. You have the absolute stark white background, and then you have the heron on top of that. So good use of positive and negative space there. And nice contrast in the color. And we can move to the next. And this is a heron doing nest building, and he's just in flight again, and he has a lot of white around him. In art photography, you'll see sometimes a lot of white space in a small image, or manipulation of the positive negative space for impact. And it just happened that, well, he was flying, so I had to take it against the sky, and that's how that turned out. I was pretty happy with that. So we can move to the next. There's a little more green in this and a little more blue, so it's a different kind of picture of the same birds making their nest. So nature photographers have to work with what's there. It's not like working in a studio. The birds, you can't tell them when to fly or where to fly. You have to be the one that gets the timing right and be in the right place at the right time with your equipment set correctly. And often it requires a great deal of patience. So I think most people like to see birds when they have their wings spread. That seems to be very appealing as a visual image. And in this case, there's quite a bit of industry in the birds building those nests. And I think there's a bit of magic in that, to see what they're up to. And then we'll move to the next. And this one may not be quite as technically perfect, but it's definitely a very difficult picture to get. This is in North Saanich, and this one was from this spring. And this is this mom that had 3 little chicks, and they were all hungry. And so she was feeding them. Pretty hard to get pictures when there are a lot of leaves and branches in the way, because generally they tend to build their nests in, well, places that are quite protected because of predators. And at any rate, I did get some nice pictures of those heron chicks this year that I think turned out quite well, thanks to a very sharp wildlife lens that I have that's a little bit heavy, but not too heavy to carry around. And I've grown very fond of it. I love those action photos when you can catch a moment like that. And that's the question of timing that I was mentioning before. Timing in photography is very important, and where you can stand, where you can be, so that you can manage to get that photograph and get a good photograph. And we can move on. And these are the little chicks, again, could be possibly lightened a little bit in certain areas, but there's a negative space behind, so no distractions. You just have the leaves. They've grown up tall enough. In fact, you can see their eyes when you see a little bit bigger image. And it's really quite impressive to see those 3 little chicks at that stage of life, growing from those little tiny things and sitting up in that nest waiting for mom or dad to come home with something for them to eat. And the nest, fortunately, there's good focus in that, so I think it creates a really nice image. And we can move on to the next. So we have a heron here at the Esquimalt Lagoon. This one is in action. Again, not always easy to get because you have to have your settings right. You have to have very fast shutter speed in order to capture the action and not get a big blur. And you try for all the sharpness you can. In wildlife photography, sometimes having a little blur indicates that they're moving at quite a velocity, so that doesn't hurt. There's a little bit on the upper right there you see, but the rest is in very sharp focus. And I love those water droplets and that are coming from the feet as it sort of takes off. The motley effect in the background is something called bokeh, and that comes from a Japanese term. I think it means haze or smoke. And it creates a nice pattern background rather than the sharpness in the image in the background that might distract you from your main subject, which in this case obviously is the heron. And we can move on to the next. And these are the ubiquitous gulls, which I'm pretty fond of. These are gull chicks, the ones that are gray. So I'm always quite fascinated with them because there's sometimes even this year's chicks that have grown just at such a speed. It's quite phenomenal. that they're almost as big as their parents within a few months. And this one is at Patricia Bay, which is quite close in Sydney here, close to the airport. And they do a lot of digging for clams there. So I like to find them with doing what they're good at, and to show that in the photograph. I think it's something that a viewer can really appreciate, and just a nice, simple gray, watery background there. And we can move on. Okay, just looking at mine. Oh, and these were from, I think, somewhere close to here too, Island View Beach. Reflections are really quite magical in photographs. I think everybody loves to see that. And there's nothing more beautiful than a Canada goose, really, in flight, in formation. And so I just happen to have 3 of them. Sometimes you can get more of them, but I did manage to get a nice sharp picture of them, and on a nice blue background, which is the water. And so that's good composition with the 3 of them. I didn't mention the rule of thirds. That doesn't have anything to do with the number of birds, but just to try not to have your horizon come in the middle of your picture, or to divide it up sort of into quadrants, but into more like thirds. It's more pleasing to the eye, and just better use of your space in a photograph. We can move to the next. And I do have quite a few bird pictures in here this year, because I have a wildlife lens that I was using. And I like this one because it was very sharp, very hard to get these birds, because they do tend to go right into the bushes. And I liked the way he was sitting on that branch there. Everything is in focus. And then the background is a very good example of the bokeh effect. And if you're buying lenses, sometimes they talk about the bokeh, so you might be interested in that. It's a feature that is much sought after. So we can go to the next. And then this little fella, these are very common birds, but again, I really love the coloring. He kind of matches his background. They are so well camouflaged, it's hard to find them oftentimes, and that's a very good example. I'm sitting on a branch. And again, a really lovely sort of greeny background there. So we can move to the next. And this is a little squirrel. I just liked his, I'm going to take a bow for you now. I had a series of pictures of him. In an ideal world, I probably would have taken that little white spot out, but I didn't do that. But the squirrel himself is in nice sharp focus, and so is the tree that he's on, and a really lovely green mottled background. And we'll move to the next. And this again is a local bird. His leaves on the rose bush are very sharp in focus, as is his lovely feathered coat. And he has something in his mouth. He's on his way somewhere, building a nest likely. So just really important to get really sharp focus on these creatures if you're photographing wildlife, obviously, and a nice use of the negative space there. So there's no distraction in the background. You just have the bird and his the foreground with the leaves. And a good complement of colors. There's a little bit of red that runs through the green, and he's obviously a little bit red in his coloring. So we can move to the next. And these are some geese. I just found that pretty fascinating to watch these little goslings feeding. And the parents, they're really great parents. They're just always watching out. They're kind of on red alert. That would be the father in the background, and the mother was busy teaching them how to pick up and eat the kelp. There are all kinds of things to learn if you're a little gosling or a little creature when you first hatch or first born. And it's great if you manage to not disrupt them or disturb them in any way, but to get a picture of them. So I try to stay back and use a lens that will magnify their image so I can get a really good, crisp, clear picture of them. And in this case, I have a good depth of field, so I have good foreground and good background. So I have the context, composition is good, and I get the picture that I wanted. And soft glow of evening light, really, really soft. You wouldn't want to take a picture like that at noonday when the light is very sharp and harsh. It would be very, very hard to get it softened up. So we can move on there. And a robin, likewise, just a very simple picture. Busy, obviously, just got his worm, and a nice grassy field that he was in. I am always amazed at how they know where to look for those worms, but they do get them. And that's a good example. Really nice, crisp, sharp lines on that robin, and good colors. So we can move on. And we have another that is a little red fox. This is in the Gaspésie. Again, he's a very unique creature. This is a surprise. I wasn't expecting to see the fox, and you do need to be ready. And timing is everything. You need to set up your picture, and then you need to press the shutter button. You might want to take a series sometimes, especially if you have a moving subject, but you want to make sure that you've got that in really sharp focus and got some nice composition around it, so that when you process the picture, you have the picture that you're looking for. Good complementary colors. I didn't talk about the color wheel, but using complementary colors is really a great idea. Red and green, blue and yellow, that type of thing. I have some purple and greens here, and a little red thrown in. We'll see those later, but those things are really advantageous to creating a really impactful and memorable picture, and conveying something to your viewer, which is really important, that you can connect with the viewer with this visual image that is meaningful to them. And here's Mama Bear. She was just on her own there. It's a little simpler picture of her, but still I quite like her there with that rock covered with barnacles, and she's a beautiful bear. And that's a very beautiful portrait of the bear. So we can move on from there. And there are a lot of flowers around Victoria. So something that is always there for a subject. These are beautiful magnolias. They're not as easy to photograph as it might appear. If you get a really good photograph, this has very soft, gentle pastel hues and a lovely mottly background with a little bit of light in it to complement the white of the magnolia. So just really beautiful, delicate colors, and again, complementing each other. So it's a lovely composition. And some people like still life. So this is kind of still life. And you've got the autumn, you've got the, well, it's not really autumn, it's the first crocus of spring, but it lasts such a short time, but you've got, I think, leaves left over from the autumn that are there, and they kind of collapse right there on the forest floor. I just find that really a nice composition. It's very pleasing to me. It's a little bit of good balance and harmony there, and just kind of refreshing forest scene. And these are bees, a couple of pictures that are coming up. And again, really sharp focus on the flowers and on the bee. If you're going to have a bee picture, it should be really in sharp focus. And just the dark there on the right that is cutting out distraction, that's would be a negative space there. And just a beautiful, beautiful plant, that purple and green. It's called a speedwell, I think is the name of it. I just think that it's got some really beautiful colors and features, and that bee obviously loved it too. So we'll move on from there. And I think we have another picture of a bee. It's just closer up. I like the detail in his wings and the beautiful soft fuzzy yellow jacket that he has. I think it's really interesting when you can get a real close-up of a bee to see what they actually do in those with the flowers, when they're attracted to them, when they're pollinating flowers. So we don't have enough of them around. I really like to see if I can get a good picture of them when I do see them. And we'll go to the next. We're moving on to mountains. And so we have some great light here. We have light emanating from the clouds. We have something that you might put on a postcard or a card with a message. And some really great sky effects there. You get the silhouettes and the kind of layers of mountains there. And in the foreground, you have that lovely row of trees and the water in front. So you have the context you on the waterfront and the trees, and then the light from the sky. I think that's a very satisfying picture and well distributed in terms of composition. And we can move on. So I think we're moving on to some travel pictures that are a little further afield. I think this is in the coffee country in Colombia. And I thought it was a very good example because of the red and the green and just the detail in the forest, and the light was coming through. And so I put that in. You can find something like that in a photograph. It's a line that leads somewhere. That jungle is a bridge is leading through the jungle, and we did actually walk on it, but also traverses a really deep valley that is full of trees that you couldn't walk through. And we can move on. Oh, I think we're moving back to Beacon Hill Park, cherry blossoms. So that might be slightly out of order, that one. I find it a little difficult to get a really great picture of cherry blossoms. Do you get them close up, or do you get the whole tree, or do you get a branch? In this case, I got the whole trees, and I was happy with that. It's a beautiful time of year, something that you might want to try to photograph yourself. Good. I think I've gone on quite a long time, and I didn't really ask if there were any questions, and I'm really sorry about that. I've been
well, I've not seen any questions popping up in the chat box, but we can certainly open it up for a few minutes and see if people would like to. I can stop the share for a moment if you like.
Sure.
Okay, I'll stop the share, and then this will go back onto gallery view so we can see everybody that's here. If anybody would like to ask a question, please feel free to unmute yourself and just pop in there with a question if you have one, or a comment. I'd like to say, Delia, I'm really enjoying how you point out the different aspects of the photos, and how you're getting the crispness and showing us leading lines into things, that particularly that last picture where you were in Colombia, and just that little section of red in that big green jungle. It just, my mind went to, well, where's that going, and where did it come from, and what's beneath it? So it was quite a story that little section of red, purely from a visual view, having the red against the green was interesting. But then to me, the storytelling aspect of it was fascinating too.
That's something really that I meant to mention too. Thanks for bringing it up, is the storytelling aspect of photography, because really stories should convey a message. I think pure art photography sometimes is a little more design oriented if it's studio work, and so it's a little different than art photography in nature. And but the storytelling aspect will certainly help to engage and inspire and intrigue your viewer. You want to have people thinking about your photograph and remembering it, and maybe standing there looking at it and thinking those things. Well, where did that come from? Where does it go? Can you really walk across there? It is something I think that will stay with the viewer, and you want your photographs, good photographs should stay with the viewer in the mind's eye so that they can contemplate that.
Mhm.
One thing I noticed, Delia, is, and I assume that you probably laid out quite a few photographs and then made some selections for the show, but that you had, a lot of them had parallel lines, not necessarily parallel with the horizon. You might go on a diagonal, but a photograph would have several lines that were parallel with each other in the photograph. I found that quite pleasing.
Oh, well, that's an interesting comment, and it's true. We do like to have like horizons that are straight. We like to see parallel lines. Certain things do appeal to people, and those I think you can see those in some of the ones that have boats that have a lot of masts going up, and the boat had a lot of clean lines. That's very pleasing. Some of the trees, the trunks. I think that is very pleasing to the eye.
The ones I liked the best, though, and not necessarily, they were parallel with each other, but not necessarily vertical or horizontal. They were on an angle, like you had drift, and then you had the line of the beach. But your eye must have gone to the fact that there was 3 parallel lines inside the piece of art that, even though they were on a diagonal or whatever, I just, to me, it gave a sense of symmetry or order, some kind of order to it that made it really pleasing.
No, that's a really great comment. I'll keep that in mind. You know, we learn all the time. And as I said, it's really individual a lot of times what makes a great photograph. And it's subjective. How do you respond as an individual, as a viewer, to that? And maybe there's something that a viewer has seen that I haven't really thought of. So
well, I was thinking that it might bring order, that if there's too much going on, you feel a sense of chaos. But I felt a sense of pattern. I guess it brings a pattern to it that I assume that, I don't know whether consciously or unconsciously, that you selected those ones that had some kind of a pattern because it was pleasing.
well, in some cases, yes. In some cases, I probably didn't think about that, and maybe you noticed that. So it's a good thing for me to really watch for, because we do look for that sense of calm. I think that's appealing. We don't really like things that are disturbing unless in a lot of, I guess sometimes people like the darkness, or in photographs, that would be akin to a little bit of sort of chaos. And rather than the calmness and the light and the tranquility that I think a lot of us seek through, you know, to be visually pleasing. Did you want to ask a question, Nancy? Was there something there? No? Okay.
I've got a couple more questions, if you don't mind.
Okay.
And it's more on the technical end of things. When you say you have a good wildlife lens, how far away are you from, like, because I was looking at the grizzlies thinking I would not want to be that close. I mean, I appreciated seeing them up close because I would never get that close, but I'm curious to know how far were you away from those bears?
Quite far. Yeah, those lenses do magnify a lot. I was in a boat, and yeah, I think there's sort of a protocol too, like to be a certain, like with grizzlies, a certain distance, just like the whales. So pretty far, I guess. I'm thinking like maybe 100 feet.
Okay.
Yeah. I'm kind of guessing with that. I'm thinking like a sort of a city lot, right, is 50 feet, kind of double that at least, or 3 times. I think maybe 150, 200 in some cases. You're trying to, they don't go too close so as not to disturb. Right. But yeah, it's a challenge. Like with those heron chicks, that's a long way away that I have to stand, because I mean they're way up in the top of those trees, right? So you have to have a pretty powerful lens to be able to get that, and then sometimes you have to crop and magnify. So that's why you need a really, really good quality lens
Mhm.
in order to be able to get the crispness that you want in the end.
Good. I do see that Nancy has a hand up, and then Marilyn after that.
Just curious about the length of the lens.
I think mine is goes up to 600. It's a Sony wildlife lens, but I've done some reading and experimenting with it, so I think it's best around 500. So, but you know, you can push it up to 6 if you need it. Yeah, so that's quite a lot of magnification. On the other hand, I have another lens that it is up to 300, and I noticed just a huge difference when I put those extra 200 or 300 on, like double that. So yeah, for that kind of photography, it's the only way to go, because you just can't get a big enough image to really get a really crisp enlargement from otherwise.
Okay. Thanks for that question. And Marilyn, you had a question or a comment?
Yeah, I had a comment. Oh, they're lovely, Delia. I wanted to say one thing it didn't cover is how much patience you have to have, and sometimes luck to take those lovely photos, because, you know, especially wild animals, they really move, you know, birds and such. So thank you very much. That was great.
Well, I'm glad you enjoyed it, and there still are more. This is sort of our mid-break. It's true, the patience required, and the times that you take a lot of photographs and you don't really get anything that you're really, really happy with. So some people say, well, don't press the shutter button until you've got that perfect image. But sometimes if you're trying to get pictures of birds, you set it up as best you can, and then you take a series of pictures. You might even test to see if you've got what you want, and then go at it again. Yes, Anne.
Well, one comment you made philosophically when you were introducing it was that there's no blank canvas in photography. I never thought of that before, but the artist has a white empty space and chooses what to put on it, and you're stuck with what's there. So you have to look around at what's there and pick an image that you think is going to work.
This is true, unless you're working in a studio, which I don't, where you have just an empty room. But in nature, yes, you look around, you look for the details in certain things, or you look for the landscape, or you might try to get individuals in it. You know, you should ask permission. I have a few people. You might get architectural, say, buildings, or I have some of sailboats. That type of thing. What's there? And behind Nancy, she has a beautiful landscape. I mean, there are lots of great, beautiful things to take pictures of, but you do have to keep your eyes open and develop that artistic kind of sense of what's going to make a great photograph.
All right. Did you want to show a few more?
Sure, I'll show a few more and see if
Okay.
we can flip through them. We don't have to talk so long and
Okay,
about each one, because we're getting quite close to the end.
sure. So this was
Okay,
the,
so just kind of flip through and I'll just offer a little comment. This is the coffee country in Colombia, again, taken from a kind of a high up perspective to get a wider view of it. And we can go on. And this country scene, really great depth there with beautiful colors in the foreground and nice misty haze in the background. That's in the East Coast. We can go on. And Percé Rock, same thing, sort of framed with the trees and lovely mist covering it. We can go on. And maybe see a, trying to see where we are. Again, a beautiful tree and the shape of it. Sometimes the shapes are what you're after, and against the clouds. And a couple of landscapes. That one is in Percé Rock again, and another one that's coming up is Percé. And then there's a beautiful one from southern Alberta, so we could stop there likely. This is one of my favorites. It's Riding on Stone Park, and that's the Milk River that runs through. It's an absolutely magical place to visit with the hoodoos and to walk amongst the hoodoos, to be there. And you have a little bit of mountain in the background there as well. Lots of detail in that. I see that it's 3 o'clock, Terry. I don't know if
I'm fine to go along a little longer if everybody else is.
okay, we can finish up the series then.
Okay, sure.
Okay, and again, framing with the logs on shore, the Olympics in the background, and those that sailboat with its 3 masts, and some lines there that are pretty nice to look at. And some sailboats, contrast there, the mountains, quite a bluey sea, a bit of cloud. And you can go on. And this is, panorama is very popular these days. That's stitching together photographs and to make a really wide panorama. This one is just one that I've cropped. It was just on a race day start. It had a lot of beautiful sailboats in it, so I really like that. Now we can move to the next. These are a couple others of the boathouses, and they have some really lovely lines in them as well, with the masts in the background. And there's another one, another angle. This shows you about the angles, how important it is where you stand when you take a picture. We'd like to show the next one. So you get a completely different view. You're in the same place. And again, that first photograph was from that same area. So you can get quite different photographs just by walking around a little. This is at the Acropolis. And this is really more of an art photograph with that background, the concrete. And these are feral cats. That's where they live. It's just right at the base of the Acropolis.
Just a minute, I'm just turning off my something that I had on. But yeah, it's good.
And one thing I noticed in the award ceremony at the Sooke Fine Arts Show was that there was there were quite a few photographs, or pardon me, pieces of art that dealt with social commentary. So I threw a couple of those in. This one is a tavern just at the base of the Acropolis, and that's the social commentary that's left on the wall there. Nobody is really free of that kind of thing, even at such what we would call almost a sacred place as the Acropolis. So we can move on from there. And this is a market in Guatemala, beautiful colors and really real people living their lives and how life is for them, mom with the baby on her back. So you have the people, the action, the lady that's tending this stall there. Excuse me, that's my dog snoring in the background.
Okay.
I think he's having a bad dream. And we might be nearing the end. I think there are a couple there that, and this again, would fall into that social commentary. These are young people who catch a ride in the back of a pickup truck to get somewhere in Guatemala. It's just a whole other world that we don't always think of, the way people live. And I took that through the front windshield of the vehicle I was traveling in. So, you know, you have to be kind of just take the picture and then see how it looks after. But if you develop a kind of a visual eye for that type of thing, you can get some really great pictures that way that show life as it is. And so we're creating really more of a documentary style of photography there, but it still is classified as art photography in some cases. This is a street scene in Paris. And again, we have a typical Parisian street scene. That's a painting and some women stopping in to see it. That and other photographs. And this is somebody going into the Louvre. I love the red in that one. I think that's just a perfect magazine kind of picture that has all the glass and the Musée du Louvre and the woman walking in. Beautiful lines and concrete colors there. And these guys, I had a little fun with them. This is in Guatemala going into Lake Atitlan. And those little boys did pose for me later, and that's their dad. But we had a few laughs. And I thought that was a great picture. I think they had fun and I had fun. These fellows were filtering out the coffee beans. They were doing the grading of the coffee in the coffee country and a few things. You've got the shovel in the background. You've got the bags of coffee. So there's some context there. You've got the detail in the coffee beans there and the fellow that's in their hands showing me the coffee beans. So that's a great picture. And this is a typical site. This is how coffee beans often get to where they're going with the Jeep. And there's a little person's Jeep there too. And I thought the Jeep in the background was great. It was carrying every kind of other paraphernalia that it might have found useful, I guess, or been useful in the past. So that's a nice one to end on from Colombia again.
And that's the end of the photos?
It is. Yeah, that's all the pictures. And thank you so much for being here and for listening and joining me, everybody that's come today. I appreciate you taking the time to, out of your busy lives, to do that. And again, thanks, Terry, for inviting me to do that and to do the recording. I know I have a couple of people that are interested in seeing the recording, so it's kind of nice that we'll be there for them. And I hope you appreciated seeing some of the pictures and learned a little bit. That was the idea. And can always get in touch with me if you like. I'm at dmccrae@icloud.com.
That's
Love
wonderful.
to hear.
Thank you so much, Delia. I really appreciate it. And I know I certainly learned some things. I'm constantly surprised how much I do learn from these talks. Not that I know a whole lot, but things that I don't expect to learn. You know, little tidbits here, like the comment that I believe was Anne that made about that there is no blank canvas in photography. That stuck a chord with me too. I really appreciated hearing that. So thank you for that. Thank you for sharing your knowledge today, and thank you everybody else for coming along and joining in once again. I will let you know that we have a few more talks coming up. I think about 4 of them. So just quickly, I'll run those down. This evening we have a talk by our design team lead, Shannon Lee Ray, who is also an artist who has some work in the show this year, a photographer as well. And she's going to be talking about living with your art. So how to hang it on your wall, where best to place it, what's the best grouping, all of those sorts of really useful and interesting things. Tomorrow we have a talk by Sheena McCorkadale, who is an award winner this year at the show. She's created a 7-foot tall statue called Isadora Arabesque, and it is reminiscent or an homage to Isadora Duncan, who changed the face of dance. But the really wonderful thing about this sculpture that she has made is it's made of chicken wire. So she's going to talk about how you go about making 7-foot tall statues out of chicken wire. And then Saturday we have a talk by Birgit Koth, who does beautiful paintings, and she's talking about how a painting will, or how you can get it to draw us in. So it's more about finding the perspective, or how you bring focus into a piece of art, and how you draw people into your artwork, which should be really wonderful. And then finally on Sunday evening, we have a talk by Mary Lou Wakefield about abstract paintings, and her particular medium is in acrylic. So it should be really interesting there too. So all of those are still available for registration on our website. In the show, I believe it's under events, and those are all listed there. So we hope you get a chance to go back and take another look at the show, and maybe drop into 1 or 2 more of these talks. That would be really lovely. And if you happen to be on our site, please, we haven't hardly had any comments this year in our guest book. So we're really asking people to take a moment or two. Maybe it's not that easy to find, but if you look under the drop down for show, there should be guest book there. So we love to hear comments about the show, things that we might do differently for next year. Hopefully we'll be back in person in next year in the arena, and have people or be able to welcome people back to the show in person. So that would be lovely. So I will end it there and say thank you so much for joining us all today. And we hope we have a wonderful rest of your day. Thanks, Delia.
Thanks again. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye.